Welcome back, upgraders. On this episode of Upgrade Me, we take you inside the motivational mindset of teenage multinational kart racing champion and burgeoning Formula racer Nikhil Bohra. Through his regiments, training, trials, tribulations, and biggest growth opportunities, get yourselves ready. Buckle up. Welcome back to part 2 of Upgrade Me with the big boys from the Bohra family. We're adding in Nikhil Bohra, who is a burgeoning race car driver and living the life, about to go out to college in New York City and cutting his teeth under the tutelage of one of the greats here. First question, how long until we see an Asian Women Drivers Championship?
First question. Okay, no. We can answer. We can go through the steps and then we can answer this question. So, What do you mean by Asian Women's Drivers Championship?
Well, what do you think I mean?
Are you asking that the F1? When will we see the F1 World Champion be an Asian woman?
Oh wow! Well,
is that
that could be a part of the timeline as well. I mean, it might be a little bit more of an extended. No, there's all stereotypes are based in truth, right? And when you let's just go this way. If you were to rank certain people from around the world in terms of their likelihood of being a championship, let's say a young man from Italy, an Indian American from Singapore, or a woman from Hong Kong. Where would you rank those three?
You can't rank them. That's the thing. Though you got to put it in the sense that when you give, when we make these stereotypes, we make them of regular people driving regular cars that you go and you get a license for.
That's true.
But I don't think people understand that that's like saying who is on average going to walk faster and then comparing that to Olympic sprinting. Do you know what I mean?
Oh.
In the sense that, will we see...
But we do see a lot of Kenyans and Jamaicans winning.
But do they walk faster? Are you going to do a study on who walks quick?
We might need to.
That's
we might need to know.
Exactly.
No.
Right?
No.
So
you're saying it's more nurture than nature?
Yes. Well, I mean, I would say you can nature yourself to a standard, and maybe a combination of nature and nurture makes you very fast.
Yes.
But I think you can see in F1 right now, there's a lot of people with not so much nature who have got there.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And kind of thugged it out, and they just put the work in. And you see that in a lot of sports too. But obviously the best of the best in especially in the modern age will be the pinnacle of both.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's varieties of talents and varieties of efforts put in as well.
I saw a woman square in her late 50s riding a big cruiser bike, like a bicycle, a beach cruiser bike with giant training wheels, like a few days ago in Taiwan, and I caught it. It was like Guinness Book of World Records, like oldest training wheels in the world. Yeah.
Guinness Book of World Records, oldest training wheels ever.
So speaking about transferable skills, street driving versus track driving, nature versus nurture, getting the cutting edge versus just gritting it through. Are there fundamentals that are transferable between race driving and daily driving in your life?
Yeah, you have a steering wheel and you have pedals. Right. Aside from that, the way you use them is very different, right? In street driving, you're using them to get from point A to point B. Right. By law, at the limit of the speed, right, safely, without crashing or interfering with other road users, right? In racing, it's trying to get from point A to, essentially point A, right? As fast as possible, at the limit of grip, fighting the car and taking risks. Right. Of course, you don't want to crash, but you are much closer to the limit of crashing than when you are driving on the road. Now, I will say that, again, if you are given civilians and there's a lion chasing you, Usain Bolt has a better chance surviving the lion than I do, or you do, or Dad does, right? In the same sense that if a racing driver is presented with like a civilian car situation where things are about to go wrong, or some oil tankers spinning in the middle of the highway, they'll have a better chance of avoiding it because those skills are transferable, and you can drive a road car on the limit, right? You can push a road car to those limits. Sure. Of course, the limit is different, but in that sense, then it is a transferable skill because you need to push the car. Right?
Yeah.
So a perfect example, though, of where this can cause conflict is there was a situation where Nikhil, when he was first driving road cars, had perfect judgment of speed and timing, had the discerning ability to know the difference between a junction and intersection, and so properly pulled off a turn at the appropriate place. Unfortunately, the person who was administering the driver's license test did not have the same view of value that he did, and so Nikhil failed his first driver's exam.
Wow.
Yeah. That was maybe more a language barrier though. You know, like European language and like US language.
Yes.
Because in my eyes, it was like junction is like a T junction.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And intersection is when it completely
Like a
intersects.
plus.
Right. Yeah. And so apparently we were supposed to turn at the junction, but I heard intersection, so I was like driving straight towards the intersection, like a mile away that I saw.
Sure.
And then I was just driving straight, and eventually she was like, just pull over. We're done here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I suspect she also did not understand the limits of the mechanical and thermal grip of the car, and he might have made the turn with a proper understanding of how quickly he could make that turn, and with what amount of gap he could make that turn, and she might have thought that was a little aggressive.
The least amount of timing, informed timing beforehand. Oh, that's very interesting. You know, cultural differences there are extremely difficult to navigate. I think you do bring a good point from our earlier interview is about comedy. Like when I was isolated in the mountains of COVID, I actually kind of willed myself to take the driver's test in Japan, and they've spelled it out really clearly. And when Japan spells it out, it's written in stone, blood, and everything. Right? Yeah, they said you know we don't recommend that you just show up and take the test. Like we have a program, you pay the money. That's the important part. You pay, you attend the classes, and then by the end, the teacher in the classroom administers the test, and your chance of passing much higher. And I was like, yeah, not gonna do that. Like I'm sitting at home with nothing to do. I can read the book. I'll figure it out and I'll come to the test. And they're like, not many people pass that way. I said, okay. So the day of I come and I barely passed the written exam because they had an English version. And then I get to the course. It's a closed, like obstacle course essentially, right? And what I had read and found on YouTube is that in Japan, you have a loophole. You can tell the instructor to drive. You tell them you're a foreigner, you don't understand completely, like all the verbal cues, and they'll drive it once for you with you in the passenger seat, and then you just simply mimic what they did. Just mimic, wow. And I was like, so I explained it to her. I got there in the morning. This woman was in a sergeant uniform, gray, at sunup. It was 6 a.m. Nobody wanted to be there, right? I didn't want to be there. She didn't want to be there, and so I said, "Oh, good morning." She said, no response, right? I said, I in my best Japanese, which is still very rudimentary, said, I heard online that you could drive the course first, and then I could take the second turn and kind of go at it under your tutelage, and your instructions. She's like, no, you're first. She's like, you didn't pay the fee for the drive. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Just checking the status. Yeah, you not paid. Okay, yeah, you drive. So we're driving through, and they also said narrate everything. So she said if she says turn left, you're like, okay, turning my turn signal, changing lanes, turning left, point, checking mirror, and go. Right? So I'm sitting here narrating everything. Yeah, because they could knock you if they're like, oh, I didn't see you signal. It's like, well, I said it. You must have heard me say it. And then you have that kind of leverage on the situation. So we're driving through this course. She's like stone faced. She doesn't want to be there. We're just driving through this fake Disney type of obstacle course. And finally we go over a little bridge, and then we get to the fake railroad gate. It comes down, like the whole thing, like a little fake train goes by. And I turned to her, I'm like, in Japanese, my best Japanese, I turned to her, I'm like, we're so lucky. There's no traffic anywhere today. Like the commute's gonna be so easy. And she looked at me like, and she cracked, and I was like, "Oh, I got this!" And I freaking passed that. Well done. Shit. I got a Japanese driver's license. You rizzed your way to the Japanese driver's license. Yeah, I rizzed my way through that. Nice. Exactly. Awesome. So you gotta play to your audience. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So why are there so many different classes in Formula?
Like in Formula racing in general? Yes. Well, every class increases with speed. Weight, but that's not ideal necessarily. Yeah. And downforce, and grip, right?
There's also regions, or okay. So it's like boxing championships. There's not one
Exactly.
Exactly.
Take
No
all-
taxonomy. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, you could not throw a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old straight into an F1 car. You could, but they would not be very good, regardless of how good they are at racing. But you can throw them in an F4 car, and they can learn in F4, which is like the fourth. I mean, if you think of it, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure.
Right? Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3, Formula 4.
Right.
They can learn the fundamentals when it's easier, and then slightly go up to faster and faster things, and obviously more competitive as well as people get older. But it also gets more filtered. Getting more filtered in the sense that in F1 you have one championship,
Right.
that is like 20 drivers,
Yeah.
and then in F2 you have one official F2 championship, which is Formula 2. But then you have like IndyCar, which is on that level.
Yeah.
You have Super Formula, which is like the Japanese equivalent of F1. But if you actually look at like the drivers of F2, when they branch out, they're very competitive in those. So you kind of put those in the same level and say F1 is one above.
Yep.
Then you take F3 and you have like F3 FIA, which is the one that is like the subset of F2. But then there's like regional F3s. So there's the European F3, which is the one that a lot of the F3 and F2 and also now F1 drivers have done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I've done it as well. You have like Middle Eastern F3, which is a new thing. You have American F3, like F3 Ocean or whatever it's called. And then F4 is even smaller subset. So you have like Italian F4, German F4, US F4. I don't know if there's a Canadian one, I'm not sure.
India,
India, yes.
China,
So-
Southeast Asia.
So even smaller. And then, but those championships are still like relatively full. So you have like 20, 25, 30, but you have more championships. So you can imagine that the people decreases as you get towards the top because you have less championships that are equally as full.
Right.
That makes sense.
Sure.
And basically the talent gets filtered, but actually what actually happens is just the money gets filtered, to be honest. Because the budgets increase and you need to bring more and more and more to get to the next step.
Sure.
Whereas when you're at like F3, you can branch out and essentially like after a year in GT cars, which is just like souped up normal, well, not souped up good road cars.
Right.
You can make money after a couple of years and make a salary that way.
Right.
That can become your life. Or you can head to hypercar, Le Mans prototype cars, which you might have seen them before. They're like really low to the ground.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Curvy. And,
Exactly. And you can make a career that way as well. So there's kind of no point to invest the extra, whatever, how much it's going to be to go to the next step. When maybe if you branch out at the next stage, you'll never pay that money back in your lifetime. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. So, I've been following your story for quite a while. You and your brother are both on this very specialized kind of X-Men track of super training to become, professional race drivers. And it's been a huge part of your life since you learned to walk, right? And then you learned to drive. It's been really fascinating to watch that, and something that's so foreign to many people. However, the skill sets I think are really transferable across a lot of different kind of playing fields. Tell me a little bit about like what it means to you in terms of like resilience, strength, endurance, mental cognition, physical conditioning. Like what's going on in those arenas?
Yeah, so it is a very all-encompassing sport. Takes all of your mind and all of your body as well. Let's just like it's not something that's necessarily like the stronger you are or the physically more capable you are, the better you are. But you have to maintain a very high standard of physical capabilities to ensure that you can then also maintain a very high standard of mental capabilities. Right? And so physical training is like, I think typical drivers would train at least 7 times a week, up to 10, where you're training like twice a day, cardio, strength, neck, etc. To keep in proper shape. Now that's like long distance, low intensity stuff. You train how like a runner trains, or you'll train like how a cyclist will train. And then some shorter bursts of very high intensity stuff. And then strength wise, you obviously can't get too heavy. Because there's minimum weight limits, but the car typically is a set weight. You can't mess around with that too much. You can't just remove like a piece of
size.
Exactly. So if you're above that weight, that extra kilo or 2 kilos is costing you like half a tenth, maybe 1/10 that you have to like outdrive. And everyone is fighting for these half tenth to 1/10. Why are you going to get like thrown away for no reason? Right. You come in at the scales after a race, your car weighs like 700 kilos and that's like the limit. And you will come in and combined, you'll weigh like 700.2.
Yeah.
And all of that weight that you put in, because you were underweight.
Recalculated.
Exactly. And you drove around the in-lap, driving on the marbles that are like residual rubber that came off the tire, picking it up to make sure you come in at 100.2 and not 699.4. Right?
Oh, wow. And this is real time then.
Real time. So right at the limit of what is possible, because those extra half kilo that you have every lap of the race on everyone else, it gives you like a quarter of a degree in tire temperature less, right? Then you can then push a little quarter tenth more in this high speed corner every lap and set up the move to then do it into, the following corner and pull away.
But just to, also, like if the limit is 700 and you're driving around at like 701, you left a lot of time on the table. But if you come in at 699.99, you're disqualified.
From everything.
Not last place, disqualified.
Oh.
It's like it didn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really?
So,
in terms of the curb weight of you and the car?
Yeah. So the penalty of like missing it is as severe as it can get.
Yeah. And that's beyond just weight. That's in like any technical
That's
regulation.
true, yeah.
Right?
Any technical
like
infringement.
people will go, even in go-karting you see this, they're like they get an engine, they buy an engine, and the regulation says the manifold can be this big, right? And they comes in this big. And so they go and they grind it out to make it right just big enough. Yeah. And if it's like a quarter of a millimeter off, chop, you didn't even come.
Wow,
right?
They're coming in with the
Every
size
technical
matters.
All right. Size matters, yes.
every single technical so
I feel like I do need to pull the lightning round video then and get your knee-jerk reaction beforehand. Like this can't wait then. What the
I
saw this the other day.
You're a little too big for that car. I get it, but you look ridiculous. Damn.
I think he needs a helmet and a halo, maybe.
Seriously.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, let alone the goggles. I mean, if you get spit up, stones spit up on the highway, it's a recipe for disaster waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, walk me through the day in the life of a high performance driving school cadet or whatever you might call it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Top Gun school here.
Well, do you want to explain why it's not necessarily a school?
Yeah, actually, so that's one of the other things that I think people don't appreciate. There is no like system that's there that you just join. Like if it's like a soccer academy or like a basketball team or tennis training camp.
Yeah.
It's you move to another country, potentially, in their case, another continent.
Right.
Your parents get you an apartment. You figure out school. So in his case, it was online, or you drop out of school, which is usually the case after, about age 16 for most of these drivers. Right. And you find the team that races for you. You find your coach separately. You find your gym separately. Like it's all a DIY. Yeah. You have to create a system around you, which obviously comes with a huge amount of cost. But also it's just the bandwidth that is consumed because all those pieces are independent from each other and they can fall apart. Your lease can't get renewed or the school doesn't like appreciate this or that, or, your coach decides to leave. So
we can go on about why driver academies are super useful.
Yeah. Why don't you talk about that?
We can do that later.
Okay.
Instead of,
it's really important to understand that there's much less of a system around drivers coming up. Right. And so it becomes a huge burden on families, because they're starting when they're 8-7 years old, and so like they can't do all this stuff on their own. Right. It's a huge burden on them because they're having to essentially adult a lot earlier, and be disciplined and do all that without necessarily having just following what everybody else is doing, to morning practice and all that. Sure. And I think it also it's a lot of distraction, a lot of bandwidth distraction because you have to manage your whole life. Right. Not just show up for practice and show up for competition.
Correct.
So it's difficult, and that's a big barrier to entry. It's the reason why I think a lot of people, even if they had the money and the desire, I know lots of families or potential aspirants who just can't do it because they're just like, I can't. We can't have our kid living halfway around the world in an apartment. We just don't. We don't have. It doesn't work for our family situation. Can't drop out of school. Can't do this. Can't do that. Can't do that. So,
it's a day in life. You kind of have 2 days in life. So you have an off season or in between races, off season kind of day in the life. And you have on track one. Yeah. So your off season one, you probably wake up at a normal time, not too early, 7:30 or whatever you prefer. At least for me, I would like to run in the morning, so just like whatever's on the training schedule that I've made.
Yeah.
So probably like 1 hour easy run, zone 2. Let's just say that. Come back, cook breakfast, coffee, whatever. Get to schoolwork. Do like 2-3 hours of AP course, whatever course I'm doing, because I was doing high school like online self-taught as well. And then have lunch. Jump on the sim. I've got a sim in the apartment. It's quite nice, actually. Yeah, so drive simulator, maybe like 2-3 hours. That can be fun. Obviously, like maybe an hour and a half, I'll be like preparing for the track I'm going to be at next.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let's load it up and do practice runs, long runs, short runs, different tire compounds, setup stuff I can try just for fun, just to like experiment with myself.
Right.
Obviously, if I went to the factory of the team and drove on the sim there with the other drivers and like the prescribed sessions that we do, it's a bit more like specific to what we're actually going to do at the weekend. But for this, it's just for my own, like basically just improvement.
Sure. Yeah.
And then maybe call some friends, jump on the sim together, go race and drive. Yeah. Because most racing drivers will have their own at their home. So you can like ring up whoever you know.
Yeah.
Then
train. You like get together in person, or you like network?
Network. Yeah, just call like Discord or whatever. Yeah, it's like gaming, right? Except you go and race together. So it's all like it's like improvement in a sense.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like scrimmage.
Yeah.
And then second training session. I mean, strength training session is not that. It's like 60, 90 minutes, depending on what you need to do. Then more work, sleep, repeat, right? On track, it's like, okay, whatever time your session is, you come 1.5 to 2 hours before. So let's say 7 a.m. at the track. So like whatever, 6 a.m. you wake up, get ready, you come to the track. Look at all the data and video that you need to look at for that day. So whatever was prepared by the engineer, but also what you decided to see in like your little notebook. You say, I want to see this corner from last year because you had this driver who I've heard does it really well, for example. And you go for your session, like let's say it's a test day. You do your session, you drive, you come in, you give your feedback as well as you can, maybe change tires, adjust setup, whatever you need to do. Come in, review the data, footage, whatever. This goes on all the way until like, let's say 7:30. You have dinner at the track, then you go back, analyze a little bit more. It's like 9 p.m., head to the hotel, go to bed, wake up, repeat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is how far in advance of an event?
This can be like a month in advance. You get like 2 or 3 days in a row at one of the championship tracks. Okay. Typically, as you go up in ranks, testing gets more limited.
Oh.
Yeah, so that people can't just go and drive unlimited days.
Sure.
Yeah. But also like on the event day, you know, in F1, you have like, if you work backwards, you have like the race before that you've had qualifying. And then before that you've had like FP3, 2 and 1.
Sure.
It's like, that would be an FP1 and FP2 day.
Okay.
So you'd show up at the track, even though they're on track for like 1 hour and 1 hour, maybe at like 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.
Sure.
The day is 14 hours long for them.
Right.
At the track. Yeah.
A lot that goes into it. Speaking of venues, what's been your favorite venue to drive to date?
The track that I really liked until last year, I think, then some other tracks overtook it, was Mugello. They raced it there in F1 when there was like COVID stuff and they weren't able to race everywhere, so they fill races in the calendar. Beautiful track. It's in Tuscany.
Oh yeah.
The elevation is ridiculous. You're like standing here, like maybe on, let's just say, ground level, and there'll be like, you'll see another portion of the same track at like the height of a 8-9 story building. Yeah. It's ridiculous. And then you come down all the way down to like below where you're standing.
At natural elevation.
Natural elevation. It's literally just a beautiful high-speed track plopped on a mountain. Yeah. Ridiculously fun track to drive. The first track I did my F4 test, it was the track I first drove F4.
Right, it's a closed track. Like this is not like where you see in like Vegas. They actually close down real streets. And
it is a circuit. Yeah. Typically these tracks are circuits, right?
Yeah, the street races are more rare, although I think they're becoming more popular.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, they're always popular, but they're becoming more prevalent.
Yeah, the two most popular are the F1 in Singapore and Vegas.
Yeah, exactly.
But also Monaco.
Right?
We're just driving right through
the and then wait, is there one in
the wet markets?
Baku?
Yeah.
Street circuit.
That one is a very nice
Azerbaijan,
yeah. Oh, beautiful! Wow, so right in your neighborhood there in Italy. That's awesome. And you spoke about how the when you speak about the training and also just like the experience itself, it sounds a lot like what I would imagine it's like to be an astronaut. You're in this highly computerized environment, like everything is like, fully interactive with your team, with your coaches, and you're in this like kind of hot seat reacting to G forces, and so, and you've talked about how technology is like granular down to the decimal point. Like, what have you seen? What have you witnessed as in terms of game changing technology in your lifetime?
Ooh. Does it have to be like racing related? Or could it just be something?
I mean, it could be Siri 2 or Siri 1. Right?
I mean, technology wise, I feel like in my lifetime, well, this is an aside, but like I've started a little bit of investing courtesy of him.
Okay.
And I think I invest in the way I think my future will end up, like how the world will end up when I'm like 50 years old, so 30 years down the line. Yeah. And I mean, one technology, it's not new at all, but it's nuclear energy, I think will be super necessary when it comes to like how much energy we need as a society going forward.
Sure.
And how to not like destroy the planet in the process.
Right.
In terms of racing, F1 technology is like, it trickles down to the rest of the industry. Mm-hmm. You see, like now there are V6 turbo hybrids, and back before we had these engines in place, we didn't have many V6 turbos. Like no one ever thought of like, oh yeah, let's do less cylinders and let's just jam like air and pressure. Yeah, exactly, to make them stronger. But I think I take for granted, honestly, what like how far F1 has come, and like all this downforce stuff. It doesn't get used in like road cars except for like the very high end. So I think I'm more excited to see what comes out next year with the new regulations. Because they're doing like more active stuff with changing wing angles while you're driving. Right. Yeah. And then maybe I'll have a better answer for you.
Okay. But in our day, anti-lock brakes came from, basically Formula One. Race, a lot of things having to do with wheel and differential, traction control, things that we kind of consider safety features now. Shifting. They come from Formula One. Safety, ease of driving. A lot of those actually came from, the relentless pursuit in F1 of like trying to create performance, or elegance. Sure. In terms of driving. So it's like all technology. It's like Velcro came from the, NASA. from NASA. It's when you are forced with a really, really challenging problem and compress a lot of parameters around it, but then are able to shove a lot of money into it or a lot of resources into it, you get novel solutions that you may not bother with. And so I do think that there's there. But I think that there's a lot that we also and this isn't just true of racing. I mean, you see it in finance, you see it in a lot of different places where I think that these industries, if I can call them that, really have pushed just general like computational technology, communication, and information and data, aspects of technology, latency, the speed at which things can get either computed, stored, or transmitted. I think a lot of that is actually like not necessarily coming from there, but they're being like optimized in certain places, and then they end up in our real life.
You both have now mentioned just sort of the kind of pyramid shape of how formula racing works, and how the more you're involved and invested in it, the more it kind of unlocks these kind of upper tiers. I was just curious, like obviously you mentioned curb weight and like the obvious things like the acceleration of the car, the grip, the speed, the girth, the length, the whole thing, right? But what in terms of the technology, I'm curious like how much more like futuristic or like Iron Man like is it once you get into like the big boy cars versus like the training wheels.
I mean, if you look at an F4 car, nowadays they look quite nice, but if you really if you open it up, you look at the engine, it looks pretty ridiculous. It looks cool. Yeah. But I mean, it's just even Formula One. The suspension is just bones, like just wishbones connected, right? Yeah. Metal connected to a monocoque, which is basically just a chassis, one chassis, right? Where you sit inside, and that's it. And then it just connects to the back where there's no more wishbones. It's just it's the most stripped a race car can be. Right. But I think the thing that gets most advanced, apart from F1 just having ridiculously complex engines, is downforce, is aerodynamics, right? Yeah. So in F4, I mean, I could have drawn the aerodynamics on the F4 car. I mean, it's a flat front wing with a gurney, a rear wing that's shaped that you can just adjust with whatever angle you'd like. Sure. And the floors have a tiny little bit of like of I don't know what the word is. I mean, it's a channel, but I don't know the
Like a
technical
ground
term.
effect, yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't do much, and the diffuser is fairly useless. And then you go up, and the F3 you get like much more complex downforce already.
Okay.
But it's not like the floor is still wood. Even in F2, the floor is still wood.
Oh.
Then you get to F1, the floor is titanium, right?
Yeah.
Then you get to F1, and you see the car up like that on a crane, and you see like 50 different channels where some like high functioning engineer is like, we need one there because that on my CFD, is it CFD? It's CFD, right? The continuous, CFD shows that, you know, it will produce more downforce above 260 kilometers per hour when DRS is not open for, you know, like, so that technology gets so much more. And also in F2 and F3 and F4, the car is kind of given to you, right? It's like Dallara or Tatus. It's just a brand of car. Yeah. And they just like Porsche, Audi, and
It's
they
a
make
stock car.
Yeah, it's a stock car.
Everybody has the same thing.
They sell it to you, and you can. I mean, you can adjust the setup. If you take all the permutations of what you can do, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of ways if you combine everything. The same way a Rubik's cube has like quintillions of permutations. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the car is fairly like stock. You cannot like add a part and place it there because that's illegal, and then we'll get disqualified. Yeah. In F1, they give you a rule book and then you build your car to fit the rule book, right? And that's why the technology is so much more advanced, but that's also why we get so much more innovation there, right? Because the F2 car follows the F1 car. They say, okay, here's your rule book. And then the F2 car is like, oh, what are the F1 guys doing? What can we use that's like, won't cost more money? Right. And we just shape it in this way. We get a faster car. Yeah. The F1 engineers are the ones who actually have to like create stuff from thin air, basically new ideas out of thin air.
Sure, yeah. We got a lot of kind of parameters to work with, then, right? So much physics in there.
And just like a kind of a fun trivia fact, which I think a lot of people have heard, but in case they haven't, you know, when we talk about downforce, you can kind of think of it as like an airplane upside down. So, you know, airplanes have wings to make them have upforce, I guess, you know, to go have lift. So it's like negative lift. Right. But if you think about it, because, you know, if you've flown on a plane, you know, you have to drive like the plane down the runway at a certain speed, and then you hit that speed, and then at some point the lift is enough to take it off. Sure. So if you turn that upside down and take an F1 car, you know, I don't think anybody's tested this in practice, but you can computer simulate it. F1 cars generate about their entire weight of downforce at 100 kilometers per hour, which is 62 miles per hour. Now, if you think about what that means intuitively, that means that if you flip the car upside down, it could drive on the ceiling. Yeah. At 62 miles per hour.
But at about, at their top speed at like 330, they generate like 4 to 5 times their weight.
So they are like, you know, so that 700 or 800 or 900 kilograms or whatever is like 4,000, you know, kilograms, like 4 tons, you know, of, you know, force. Like, you know, like weight, like that thing is mashing down on the ground really hard, which is why you can corner so hard.
But it's nimble, like, you know, it's nimble as though it's 700 kilos, but the grip is it's 4,000.
That's why I'm saying to me it feels like, you know, fighter jet school to you know, astronaut academy, like there's
except it's also, you know, a high performance sport where you have to like beat other people. In astronaut, it's like you have a procedure, you have a job to do. Your job is to get there. I don't know much about it.
Saying Lauren Sanchez and Katy Perry, you're not out to beat people.
Good point, actually.
The best meme I saw was, you know, if 3 minutes in space makes you an astronaut, does that not make me a gynecologist? Just saying, you know.
Yeah,
loud and proud. So in your experience, what's been the biggest learning curve?
Oof. I think a lot of people think it's the speed and the fear. Yeah. When you really look at like when I have my friends who are like really good drivers, and I mean I have one friend who's I've thought is one of the best drivers I've ever seen in my life. His name is Alex Dunn. He's an F2 now. He was leading the championship until this morning. He's an absolute like alien when it comes to the brakes, right? Wow. Yeah, because that's where you make the time in racing, right? Think you have a car that is kind of set up in a way where it's flat, and then when you brake, all the weight goes to the front. Yep. So you have the front more loaded than the rear. If you turn, the rear is unloaded, you spin. Yes. So you need to manage your foot at the same way as you, at the same like rate as if you turn in.
Right.
But that's easier said than done because you can be a little bit over that limit, you can be a little bit under that limit, and you can cause oversteer and or understeer, which is when the car turns more than you want or less than you want, right? We typically characterize that as oversteer is you crash but you don't see the wall. Understeer is you crash but you see the wall.
You're just sliding into it.
Yeah. Front first, right?
Oh, front. Oh.
Yeah, because you can't turn that much in the air.
Yeah. Okay.
So, what I think makes a driver really good, and like you see this in Max Verstappen, for example, is he's got a very, very, very good feel for the brake. So he can be very on the limit of the brakes, but he can also drive a car with a lot of front end grip. Yeah. Which, if you think about it, right, what's the fastest way to drive any distance, right? Full throttle, steering straight, no corners.
Asian woman driver.
Now you get it. Now he gets it, yeah.
But the less you're able to turn, the less you need to turn, and the less you have to brake, right? The faster you will go. And so when he's able to drive with such a high amount of front, he can actually brake less because he doesn't need the front to go down as much, right? Because the front's already there. It's preloaded. Yeah. So I think the biggest learning curve is the brakes. It depends from car to car as well. Like some H pattern gearbox car, right? It might be the shifting or maybe the heel toe, right? Where you press the clutch and the throttle at the same time to blip. Yeah. But
you're still clutching?
No, we don't clutch anymore. But in modern day formula cars, I'd say it's the brake.
Okay.
And like everything has a consequence or a challenge. So you can say, okay, well, just give me maximum front grip like Max Verstappen does. But then that's like saying, okay, I'm going to set your mouse to maximum speed.
Right.
Move it 1 pixel.
Yeah.
On demand. 1 pixel to the right, left, one pixel. And things like, so I mean, it's a skill that is easy, that's complex enough just talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Even more difficult to do it in a static, like a simulated situation. But then when you're in hand-to-hand or wheel combat with real conditions changing, wind, temperature, when you brake, the car's pushing back on you too, so you gotta like, it's a lot more skill than people think. People think it's just driving, like basically having balls and driving fast. It has almost nothing to do with both of those things.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, I've noticed in some of your recent seasons, you've been sharing a car, right? With a teammate, right? What's up with that? Are you is that typical, or are you guys putting a new spin on Uber Pool and the Chinese fire drill? Like what's going on with the shared car here?
Well, actually, one of the shared cars I drove was probably slower than most Ubers. So, but yeah, these are different kind of championships, right? So if you look at they have this thing called World Endurance Championship. That's not what I did, but these will be like much longer races.
Don't worry, me neither.
Much longer races where you share a car with multiple drivers and you rotate, right? You 24-hour Le Mans, you've definitely heard of it.
Sure.
Exactly. That's not one guy doing 24 hours, you'd die. Right?
Yeah.
It's like a team of
the desert endurance drivers.
Exactly, the car. It's staged racing, This was like similar, except in the one I was doing in India, it's called Indian Racing League. It's more of like we shrink the grid a little bit, make it a little bit more fun with having two drivers we qualify for each other. Right. We race separate races. So like I'll race one, he'll race two, but like we don't change driver. We only did that in one of the seasons. Okay. And then the other shared car thing I did was this thing called S1K. So it's Sepang 1,000 kilometers. Right. Sepang is a track in Malaysia, F1 track, and it's a 1,000-kilometer race. And so I did that in the Honda Jazz, which I had a lot of fun. I'm not gonna lie. Okay. Yeah, it's not very fast. Yeah. But H pattern gearbox. Yeah. Close racing, a little bit of wheel banging, door banging in these cars. Wow. And it's fun. Okay. Yeah. So that one,
like video game, you had a lot of overtakes. That was cool.
Yeah. I shared a car with one guy named Azrai Razwan.
Entry curb. This guy misses the apex link. He's watching the cars ahead. But anyways, we take the perfect line. See a car on the left, car on the right. Decide to throw it up the middle. Good shift. Car on the right was also in the slower category, so we were able to take that quite easily, and the car on the left had to back out. And then we actually turned it into a nice little quadruple overtake because this guy had a pretty poor run out of the right-hander.
I'd never met him before, but he's, a racing fanatic, basically. Sure. It was decently good. Yeah. And then Alex Young, who is Malaysian F1 driver. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in those particular competitions, it is like
it's a team effort. Yeah. That's how you have to do it. Yeah.
I see. Speaking of teams, We were speaking off camera before we came in about like the relationship with sponsors. How does that work? If you're kind of surrounded by logos and plastered, and everybody's got different spaces of real estate on your car and your uniform. What is the relationship with your sponsors?
Well, in general, right, and a sponsor will sponsor you because you're ad space, right? You're a moving advertisement.
Sure.
And so you'll see people with smaller individual logos, right, who maybe get something, or typically they get nothing from the sponsor, just a company, a parent or friend or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And then maybe some will have a full title sponsor. So AIX was doing this for a while before they bought over a team in Formula 2 and Formula 3 and Formula 4 as well, where they sponsor a driver, partially or fully or whatever. I'm pretty sure it's partially, but then their whole livery, like the whole livery of the car is their logos, their colors, their everything. It's golden, bronze, whatever. Yeah. And so obviously you've given up all your ad space basically, but you are a walking advertisement, right? Yeah, moving advertisement. Yeah.
Sure. Like a Red Bull car?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Whereas like typically you'd have a team's livery.
Sure.
But the sponsor will say, hey, team, I don't know if they have to pay the team something.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah, probably. And then they sponsor the driver, and then the driver says, okay, you can take all of our, real estate on the car.
Yeah,
But like I always talk about that racing isn't really a sport. It's a bunch of industries, racing being one of them, but then they've got when you get to the top levels, particularly F1 is an extreme example, it's a bunch of industries with a tiny little sporting piece to it where they all coalesce. And so like if you go to like the business of like racing or the business of like Formula One, these sponsors are really like, they are the source of revenue for the teams to actually build the car, pay the staff, hire, do the development, pay the drivers. And as a result, those numbers are big, and they are ad space, but that ad space also is not the end of the story. It might be that, a luxury brand is sponsoring a car. And so some of their top clients get to go to a race as a guest of, and they get to interact with the car. Or it may be that, some other like a tech company or a crypto company is sponsoring the car. So they get to meet the drivers and have a private dinner with the driver. So it's not just paying and getting advertising. It's the hospitality, it's the corporate engagement, it's the affiliation, it's the TV commercials, all of that as part. And you're basically, financing the team.
Right.
Without sponsors in F1, for the most part, with maybe one exception, the teams would go under. But at the junior levels of racing, sponsors are typically, people like me, parents. We foot the bill.
The teams don't necessarily have sponsors that are keeping them afloat. The drivers come in and they pay.
Right.
And that keeps the teams afloat.
Sure.
And then the teams provide the service to the driver.
Right.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned at a certain level also the cars are generally similar as well.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not there's not as much of the aesthetics of a car brand going behind each driver, like a Lewis Hamilton and the estate of Ferrari and
definitely not when you talk about a manufacturer team like or a team that's associated with a car brand like Ferrari, but Red Bull's associated with an energy drink, not a car brand. Right? So
they find
it kind of each one is a slightly different story.
But is the Red Bull car made by the same manufacturer every time?
It's made by whoever makes up the team in the engineering department at that time.
Correct.
That makes sense.
I see.
Because they build the car basically from scratch.
Right.
But they use vendors. It's not like there's
Yeah,
like 50 guys like literally like hand carving
Yeah.
fiberglass or something like that.
Sure,
But there are people who specialize in making chassis and aerodynamic parts, and people who make engines.
Yeah.
So the engine branding is obviously like a little bit more visible because if it says Honda or if it says Mercedes, you sort of like people understand that that's where a power unit might come from.
Right.
But if you say like some small company in Italy that nobody's ever heard of that only does the the part of the nose that is shaped like this, like that might not be familiar to people. And somewhere in between is like lubricants and brakes and things like that. There might be crowds of people who really, really know it because they're in the automotive industry, and there might be people who are like, I've never heard of that, but I feel like it sounds Italian or it sounds French or whatever.
I went to a music conservatory, and I can say that like the general focus was music most of the time. It sounds like you're also putting that front and center by the way you've described your average day in the life. What I'm curious about is, you're a young guy, or you're a human being. Are are there periods of time when driving takes a back seat? No pun intended, right? You and your brother Akshay, you guys go through these intensive kind of Top Gun Academy moments and kind of periods of life. But what are you doing to balance your life?
Yeah, so I think when you are like full-time racing, you do get the off season, but it's never ever really where it takes the back seat. Maybe you're not driving as much, but you're intentionally resting for more like capacity when you're racing. You still train. You never take a full week. Maybe you take a full week off, but that full week off is intentional for you to be able to train more, right? So when you're a full-time driver, everything is for driving. That's just how it is at that level. You have to, because if you're not, someone else is, and you're not. At the moment though, like I'm not racing this year. I'm not racing in Formula Regional like I was last year. I mean, last year, you can imagine, like half of my grid then is in Formula 3 now. And in 2023, half of that grid is also in Formula 3. And then like 3 or 4 people are in Formula 2 now. And one of them is in Formula 1, Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Right? So you can imagine that this level is basically bringing you to F1. And now I'm nowhere, maybe as a driver, I'm still on that level, but what I'm doing this year is nowhere near that level. And so driving has taken a back seat. I don't know if it's forever. I don't know if it's, for this year. I don't know if I'm okay with it being forever or if it's for this year. So I have to figure that out. But at the moment right now, driving is taking a back seat. And so I'm focusing more on what I'm going to do next. Going to university later this year.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you.
And watch out, Columbia University. It's a new man on campus coming in hot. Yeah,
steaming in. But
no brakes.
I was gonna make a bad joke.
No, it's okay. It's okay. The jokes write themselves.
But yeah, sometimes it does take a back seat. You see that for a lot of drivers. But typically you see that.
I mean, Dad was saying like you had to do a lot of adulting at a young age. You're like you're across the world. He's there some of the time as much as he can be. But I'm curious, like I admittedly so like I was trying as my best to focus on music, but I was a teenager in New York City. Like the reins are off. The city has no limits. It never sleeps. Like. I'm just curious, like, where have you adventured and what's, where have you where have you lived a bit and been a little bit more excited outside of just the regiments of, the program itself?
Dude, really not much.
Really?
Not as much as you'd think.
We could turn the cameras all this way, and then we put them in the silent room for a moment.
But even so,
yeah, exactly. Maybe I should go take a a break.
Yeah. I know we're in Singapore. Where everything's about KPIs and how much effort and effort out. Right?
But really, like if you, the racing it's so. I mean, like let's say you have a 7-day week, on average,
right?
Like 6 days you're driving. Not like driving on track, but like 6 days you're driving either in the simulator of the team or on track. And then every other day you're training and you can't go out because how are you going to go out at night?
Right.
If you are, first of all, if you're 16 years old, right?
Well, you're in Europe.
Yeah, that's true. It's okay. But also, like, how are you going to do that if you got training at 7 a.m.? You can't, right? Because you're going to miss the session. Yeah. And then all of this time, effort, money, etc. is going to waste. You can't do that for yourself. So yeah, maybe that is a lesson in discipline in a way.
Yeah.
And avoiding the distractions of whatever life. But maybe some drivers also venture out a little bit more, but I think basically everyone, especially the people who are living very far away from home, right? Like we were living more than 10,000 kilometers from home.
Yeah, right.
And like, okay, it's a nice place, but it's a village. At the end of the day,
small town.
It's a small village in Italy.
Yeah.
There's not like, you're not like in New York City where you're like, oh, everything is here. I'm in the Big Apple. Yeah. I've made it. Let's go and do whatever. Right. It's like, well, that my life is training, racing, repeat.
Yeah.
And then you come home in the long breaks and see family and rejuvenate, right? That's it.
So what unexpected skills have you fostered and developed as a result of your race car driving?
Oof. I mean, unexpected?
Yeah.
It's hard to say because all of the skills I feel like off the top of my head are pretty expected.
Yeah.
It's a competitive sport, so grit, resilience, determination, discipline, yada, 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 yada.
Yeah.
But unexpected skills is a much more difficult question.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
like I
like-
grew up playing the cello like all day and all night, and as a result, like the first time I played Guitar Hero, I was like, "Hey, this is I'm like I got this."
Yeah.
Or when I got to college, I gave up video games, but I decided for the first semester to continue doing like some rollerblade skating, and so it sounds like I was a lot further off the rails than you. Like I at one point I was starting to experiment with my sleep cycles and just like my reaction times. So I would before bed I would have a couple shots and then I would go rollerblading backwards down the hills behind Morningside Heights in Columbia, and I found that
Proper biohacking that.
proper 12. But I found that putting myself in this kind of like slowed state and doing things that were faster than the pace of life actually slowed down the rest of the things around me. So it was like, like almost like the Matrix, the glass things would fall, like happen around me and I'd be ready, something I'd be cooking and the pepper shaker would fall and I'd,
Really?
No,
Yeah,
I mean that's fair actually. It does.
That's
It kind of makes sense.
pretty
It's
interesting,
similar to
actually.
racing in a way.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you don't need to, and probably shouldn't, take 2 shots before you jump in the car and drive at 300 kilometers per hour. But you are driving at 300 kilometers per hour. It's pretty fast. So
Yes.
then the rest of the world does slow down in a way, and you have to appreciate that slowing down. And I think it did give me like a skill in slowing down almost. Like an unexpected skill in enjoying being slow and like actually feeling your body recover and your mind recover to go push for more. I think also unexpectedly I became a little bit more entrepreneurial. I don't exactly know why. Maybe it happened at the same time in life, not necessarily because of the racing, but it might have. People, you have to kind of fend for yourself a little bit, but also be very specific with your feedback and coordinate people in some sense, right?
Expedient.
Yeah.
I think as a driver, also you're surrounded by adults from a very young age, and those adults are not just like your cheering squad. They're like people whose careers or jobs are kind of dependent on your performance, and that starts at a very young age. So I think that you get, observing it in him and Akshay, their ability to communicate with adults, their ability to be around adults at a young age. I think it comes through when they're around adults now. And just the silly stuff, looking them in the eye, firm handshake, not being intimidated or kind of afraid to contribute to a grown up big table conversation.
It also you feel like one in a way. 'Cause
You
you've
feel
been
like an
around-
adult. Yeah. If anything, the consequence is of the flip side is that
You lose your childhood.
you kind of like lose your childhood and you maybe don't feel kind of like your peers in some ways because you've like lived this like totally different life, and some of it can feel a little bit like somewhere between juvenile or provincial and reckless, right? If you've had to live a really controlled life. I would actually say that specifically with Nikhil, I think you could even in the context of racing drivers, he's probably one of the more on the rails. Like I think he's by personality and choice, he's been more regimented. Probably could use a little bit of like loosening up. So I'll send him to you to do a little tour or something to see how the other side lives. But yeah, it's I think there are a lot of things that you've probably acquired in terms of skills and qualities that you're not aware of yet
unlocked them yet.
because you haven't been in the situation. But then you're gonna you go to college and you're gonna feel it. You go to the city, you're gonna feel it. You're gonna go to your first sort of like professional ventures outside of the racing world, and you're gonna see it and feel it. You're like, oh, where did I learn all this? And it turns out it was on a go-kart track in Thailand in 2016.
I can't say not many things, especially compared to my peers. Not many things make me like uncomfortable. Like thinking of experiences and going out of my comfort zone. Like if someone said, "Hey, I'm gonna pack a bag and like fly to like Sahara Desert," and we go like walk through it on camels and shit, I'd be like, I could survive that. I think. So why not? You kind of get a little desensitized to some of this stuff. I feel.
Grounded and acclimated.
Yeah.
Speaking of grounding and acclimation, one of the books that you've mentioned many times over the decade we've known each other is the Viktor E. Frankl book, A Man's Search for Meaning, right? And in a way, it embraces a lot of like kind of Buddhist ideals about energy of embracing heart over head. I'm curious, did your journey collectively to India also kind of influence like how spirituality and energy kind of plays a part in your life?
For me, definitely. I think, there was a lot of like innate knowledge or whatever, like intuition around India because I grew up in a Indian household. And so it was sort of like osmotic. But living there and having to sort of, deal with life. And I wouldn't necessarily say my living there was a spiritual journey. That might have been more, in my childhood. But living there was more like a journey of self-exploration in terms of like, okay, maybe I need to learn patience in certain situations, or maybe I need to understand that like the straight line is, might be the shortest distance between 2 points, but it may not be the best distance, or the best route between 2 points. Sometimes that's because there is no straight line, to take in a place like India. It's because we have modern science and modern problems that we sometimes dismiss, the idea of like timeless wisdom and timeless problems, and they might actually be the same thing. So there might be something for, I think, the world to learn about. There's a reason why there might have been some ideas in the past, because some of these challenges or problems never went away. Right? Like we got refrigeration, but we did not get like, in-laws like sorted out. Right? We might have like electricity, but we don't necessarily have, infinite life, right? Sure. So we can have infinite power, but not infinite life. So there might be things that are there, and that for me is like this is definitely like a next chapter of my life. I think there's going to be a lot more about it, but it's all I think been building, just hasn't really been expressed. That's for me.
And for me, when we were in India, I was super young. We left India when I was 12. So for me, it was just I made good friends and I had a great time actually in elementary school there. But beyond that, I didn't even know what else there was, because I moved there when I was 4. So I just thought it was a cool place and met new people, met nice people, and yeah.
So with a younger brother following a similar training path, how do you navigate supporting one another while competing or not?
Good. While he thinks about this, I gotta just jump in with one story. So for the first several years of them racing, they raced in the same go-kart category, the mini category, the youngest, basically.
Right.
And, Nikhil was dominant.
Right. I remember this.
Not just against his brother, but against everybody. In 2016, he won all 3 Asian championships and was kind of untouchable. Yeah. And Akshay was always like sort of like in the middle of the pack, like rarely ever on the podium. And it wasn't because of lack of ability or talent. It was a little bit just the age difference, just younger.
Just 9 years old.
Yeah.
The first race that Akshay did where Nikhil wasn't racing, he won the race. And it was just like, yo, come on, man.
Right. That mental block just
it was a bit of mental.
Yeah. So it's a thing.
Right. It is.
You only race against.
I never raced him
a
in
couple more
karting.
times.
Never raced him in go-karting after that. Because the mini age category is from 8 to 12. But like the next one is 12 to 14 and 14 up.
Oh yeah.
So I stopped karting like properly professionally.
Okay.
I took a break when I was like 15.
Yeah.
And he's still 13. Then like came back when I was 16. He was 14, so he's still in the lower one.
Sure.
So we never actually, and we only did one race together in Formula cars.
Yeah. And they were right behind each other.
Yeah, we're normal, like more or less right next to each other.
Yeah.
So on track, it's hard. I mean, like if you asked me when I was 11 years old, I would try to like bring him up and make him, push. And every time, I remember there was one race here in Singapore as well, where I crashed out of I started first. Me and second, we crashed out of the heat, right? So for the pre-final, I started last. And so in the pre-final, I came through the grid and I found Akshay. So I started pushing him through people. So I started like pushing him into fights and to get around people. And then I overtook him. And then I was like looking, and I was doing this like knowing that I had to catch up to the front. So I started in the front for the final. But I was like looking back like, let's go fight this guy, That was quite cool. And I wish we could do that more often. Yeah. And then after that is not so much. I think off track, we don't like intentionally support each other, especially because he doesn't like to hear advice from me that much. I don't like to hear advice from him that much, especially in terms of driving.
Because they both love hearing advice from me.
But
waiting for that.
Yeah.
But in terms of like mindset, sometimes sometimes I'm the only one that can get through to him. Sometimes. It's rare, but sometimes when he's really down in the dumps, or likewise, if he knows I'm struggling at a weekend and I get a text from him, which is like, just turn off your brain and send it. I turn off my brain and send it, and it usually turns out better.
Sure.
And vice versa.
So there is this level of support, but it's more like a level of respect for competitors, right? It's not like I'm going to his races and cheering along like that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Or cheering them down.
Yeah, exactly.
Betting against them. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're actually, you know, growing up, you know, there are people who would say like, you know, of course people want to know who's better, you know, but like really the people who knew would say that like if you could combine Nikhil and Akshay, they'd be like the most amazing driver because they had kind of different approaches in how they engaged it. But I think as I've watched them in the last several years, particularly living together in Europe and racing together, they haven't changed in a way where like they feel like the same driver, but now I see where they have more similarities, more like you know, fundamental similarities, which might be a bit just the apple not falling far from, you know, the same tree. But definitely, you know, look, for financial and practical reasons, it's very common in a lot of individual athlete sports when you have two siblings that are doing the same thing, like you fire one of them.
Exactly.
Right.
That was my next question. Because when I was a kid, my brother and I both played the violin. My mom was a TV star in Japan, so naturally we had no way out. We had to do music or nothing or move out.
I get it.
Right?
I get it.
And so she at one point recognized that we were both playing the violin, same teacher, same kind of trajectory. There's a high probability we become professional musicians. So at one point, Santa Claus showed up and said, with a cello. And she was like, oh, look, you're going to switch to the cello so you guys can play with each other instead of against each other, right? Because even if you two find harmony, the world will you know, always compare.
We'll always compare. That's a really good point.
So in your architectural hat as dad and kind of like the ultimate pit crew, what have you thought that through? And
yeah, I mean, I've thought that through. Look, some of this was also like, you know, they have their own choices, you know, that they made at different points along the way. Like Nikhil actually took more breaks from racing than Akshay for sure.
A lot less European.
He did a lot less in Europe because Nikhil didn't like to be as much didn't like to be away from like kind of routine and home. And Akshay would like travel with his mechanic and just like bounce around Europe for, you know, like kind of endlessly. And so I think that they didn't really like have much of that kind of like overlap until the last few years. But like I said, I think they've made their choices where we didn't have to deal with that. And you know, when everybody was telling me, you know, pick one so you don't go broke, and because you don't want to have like the issues that, you know, Santa Claus obviously figured out in the case of you and your brother. But I was kind of like, look, I know all of those things, but I know one more thing, which is both of these guys are like, they love it. And I believe another thing, which is they both have a lot of talent and a lot of commitment. And so I'd rather take the risk that like maybe neither of them actually succeeds or one of them compromises, you know, because I'm kind of splitting it rather than rugging them, you know, and having one of them have to sit out because like they didn't have a good race or whatever. Because, you know, the rest of their lives are gonna have people making those decisions against them. I mean, but I'm a dad first, right? Sure. You know? And I see what these guys do and what they did and why they did it and how they did it and, you know, what they've dealt with. And it was just like, for me, it was never even a conversation that I could entertain. As I've told these guys both, I said, you know, your job is on the track, my job's off the track. So you do your job as best you can, I'll do my job best I can. And if we did our best and fail, at least we know we all did our best.
That's amazing. Yeah. Like you said, master clip farmer here. Knows exactly which buttons to press. It's awesome. In the first segment, we talked about mentorship and the importance of that, right? And how that's been a big part of your development and every man's development. You know, I know that you and your dad have a close relationship, and you know, working together through this kind of, you know, development of passion into profession has been your whole life, right? Curious, you know, double-sided question here. Like, have you found somebody within that shares the technical side of racing that kind of fulfills that mentorship role for you? And then I'll let you go with that first.
On the technical side, I don't think I truly found like a mentor
Handsome Hendrick, best looking man.
Hendrick doesn't speak. That's the
true.
thing.
Yeah.
You know?
All right.
I mean, like, you always-
best looking engineer in motorsports.
Best looking engineer.
Yeah.
She's gorgeous. But
and he has a twin brother, identical.
Shout out to you.
Handsome Hendrick.
You know how to find us. Handsome Hendrick.
But
Sounds like my kind of guy.
but let's say like at any stage of your career, you end up with like one engineer more or less, right?
Yeah.
Your race engineer, the guy in F1 you hear on the radio with the
Jarvis. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Is your guy. And so
Jarvis.
um
Really good point.
yeah, I had different relationships, different bonds with each of my engineers in Formula cars. I mean, I can briefly say that Hendrick was quiet, but taught me a lot of what I know.
Yeah.
And then I had an engineer in Trident named Matteo, and he was very good, but Trident had a very secretive, like, kind of way of going about things, so he didn't know too much about the setup.
Oh.
But he would explain things to me, and we'd have discussions about him. Just never what was actually on the car at the moment.
Oh.
Yeah. And on the opposite side, I was with MP last year, and they were much more open with that
They're
stuff.
Dutch.
Yeah, they're Dutch.
All right.
Yeah.
And so I did get a lot of I scratched like a technical itch I had with my engineer that year.
I think your best relationship
But-
for that was Alep.
Alip, yeah, actually.
You guys were like,
So I've had quite a few mentors in my karting days, right? Like coaches and driving wise. But I think on the technical side, I had a mechanic for 2 years that I still see. I saw him last week.
Yep.
Named Alip. And
he's Malaysian.
yeah. And he was like a full on like just pure feeling. I mean, he's like a mechanic, right? So he's like low wage worker in Malaysia. But he taught me basically everything I know and ignited my passion for like vehicle dynamics in karting.
Yeah.
When it's like it seems so basic, and he's like, what do you feel? And I'm like, I don't know. I feel this at this point in the corner. I don't really know what to do. He's like, if I do this, it will do. If I widen your rear, you'll have a more free rear in higher speeds, but it will reduce the jumping in low speed. I don't know if I can do that. And he just talk me through it all.
Sure.
And obviously like broken English is amazing. Yeah. Very dear to my heart he is. And yeah.
And he was
Actually,
also, he would take a lot of like gambles, like in the sense that he wasn't like my reflection on Alep and Nikhil they would try crazy things. They'd be like, let's turn the whole thing upside down.
We were never on the same setup as the people in our team.
Let's just like really radically like try something and see what happens. And we're just like, but they both know what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like taking like wild ass guesses. It was taking sophisticated wild ass guesses, and they owned it.
It was like if I felt something, I'd try to describe my feeling as well as I could. And he's like, give me 5 minutes, I think a bit, and he'll just write down in Malay. And then be like, we can do this. And I'm like, I don't know what that does, but if you trust my feeling, I trust your feeling. Yeah. And we just throw it on, and it would change like 4 different things on the car. Go out. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But if it works, the whole team's copying us. So we're like pioneers for the team. Yeah. And it was a very cool environment to be a part of.
And leveraging.
Yeah.
But it's, it's different. It also depends on, there's obviously a lot of interpersonal chemistry and like to create that equation. I mean, again, just to bring in Akshay for a second, when we went back to Europe after COVID, it was just me and him initially. He had this young Spanish mechanic who got sick, i.e. COVID. And then he seemed to be really good and they had but he left like in the first race and they didn't have another mechanic. So all these teams have what they call the truckie, who's the truck driver. Okay. So this guy was like an older guy. Yeah. Doesn't speak a word of English. Like he doesn't know that yes means C. He just knows that C means C, right? I mean, he does not speak a word. And they proceeded to have an unbelievable season, top 5 in the European and World Championships that year and everything. But like if you go over to the table next to the cart, like the mechanics table or whatever, you'd see this like piece of paper, and Akshay would be like, basso equals lower, like whatever equals higher, this equals more, this equals less, and he would use this like little, scratch paper, but it was like his like Rosetta Stone. He'd be like, possible basso, this, that, openo, gato, pleaso, like fake Italian. And that's how they like less was more. Well,
Amazing. Yeah. So you guys have talked about how, in some ways, like, we're passing the torch here, right? Of like the breadth of financial knowledge and kind of experience in markets. And, I definitely think there's a relationship to, like risk tolerance and, just pattern recognition. There's so many things you can learn from, we all learn from your dad. Can you talk about how you've explored, philosophical conversations about, say, like the relationship of your life to money, the relationship of your life to your belongings, and perhaps like relationships like marriage or girlfriends, whatever it might be?
We haven't talked much about stuff like this. Not too much. We
just live the dream.
Yeah, honestly. But talk like let's through racing a lot, because he was very busy when we were living in India, right? My formative years.
Yep.
But he would always find the time to take me and Akshay for races, and like 80% of the time was him bringing us.
Yep.
And on those, you're like two curious little scrawny Indian kids asking questions about everything and anything, and him answering questions about everything and anything.
Yeah.
And like breaking the rules and then getting scolded and getting scolded again and doing this and doing that and like going on these little adventures. I think nowadays it's like I have it all like a little bit deep inside. Sure. I don't even know the knowledge that I have. Yep. But I think in that way I approach like life and, as you're saying, like money, relationships and stuff like that in a way that he already does, but subconsciously, because it's kind of been like the walls have been put up in that sense, and then I've been able to have freedom within that, and that's just how it turned out. Sure. And so it's not very often that we like have these discussions, but I think because like sometimes you'll have like an opportunity and you'll ask me about it, and I'll have an opportunity to ask you about it. That's the first person I go to, because it's just like the second opinion that I do want on that. Yeah. Right. But we don't have many of these conversations like that. Yeah.
But I can,
when the time comes,
I can verify that we did talk a lot. We did talk a lot. I mean, not necessarily, like you said, not in an explicit sense. Like, Dad, how do babies get, created? It wasn't like that. Yeah. There was a lot of like just inference. And, there's a thing about like when you have a conversation with somebody and you're side by side, as instead of face to face, a lot more like just can come out because it's less intense. It's less, Sure. And so when you drive around Europe together for billions of hours, and you got to pass the time, I mean, we got a good playlist, but still, you end up having, just meandering conversations about a lot of different things. Yeah. Also, a lot of it is, and I'm not saying this necessarily like I did this or he did this or they did this, but when you live a lot of life together outside of the context of like being at home, so that's travel, that's checking into a hotel, that's ordering at a restaurant, that's dealing with somebody random, you sort of like pick up like stuff, right. You pick up stuff. And I actually have learned a lot from these guys too, watching how they navigate, because it keeps me young for one, but for sure. On the other hand,
especially when you do it so young, when you do it so young, you kind of absorb like the best of whatever you can, right? And it like traveling is kind of like, as an example, it's just like second nature in some way now, because I've been so fortunate to do so much of it when I was young.
Fantastic. Man, what a dynamic.
Like they're really good in the security line. Like they go through the security lines like pros. Yeah, they're so good. Yeah. Oh, yeah, so good. You want to be behind them. Yeah. Exactly. You don't want to be in front of them though, because they'll push right through.
No. We are respectful now.
Respectful now. You gotta respect your elders. Yes.
Yeah, respect your elders.
Pull right through. That's the stream. So I already pulled one clip from our lightning round with you. I'm curious how you'll not necessarily shoot from the hip, but maybe shoot from the heart on this last one as we close out.
Lap of the Gods. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
So if I'm not wrong, I think this year, the front two Williams, as you see in the front, they had semi-automatic gearboxes for the first time, or maybe I'm wrong, and they had that in 1994. Yeah. But Senna was still on an H-pattern gearbox, and this was like the first year in a while where they were significantly slower. But Senna is like the most talented driver of all time in the whip, and this lap is freaking phenomenal. Honestly, yeah, it's beautiful to watch.
Yeah, the whole movie is just like so emotional.
Because I mean, even if you try to learn from how he drives, you can't, because he's not doing anything based on learning. It's just on instinct, and for some reason, his brain, feet, and hands, they just knew what was correct at any given moment, and fast.
Wait, what track is this?
It was skating, right?
It was European Grand Prix, but I don't know what track they did it at. I think it was some. They don't race at it anymore.
Yeah,
some British track.
Oh, British track.
I think so.
Yeah, just for British weather.
Yeah.
Wow. God, this thing looks like an F4, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
I mean,
the technology.
Look at that.
The power of F1 now. Let's see.
Yeah.
He was one of the first guys who.
I mean, he goes in faster than them, brakes later, and then takes less
Stops.
meters,
Yeah.
and then pulls away.
One of the first guys
That's
to,
nuts.
to
80
drive
more of the
off the
time.
road, and you can see the other two Williams
Right.
are miles clear of the rest of the field already.
Right.
Which shows that they had something, but Senna had something they didn't, which was
God
pure
mode,
talent. Yeah, fantastic.
Unbelievable. All right.
Cool.
We've hung, we've dug deep, and we've covered a lot of miles. I look forward to many more chapters together. I thank both of you from the bottom of my heart for opening up your home.
Thank you, man.
And I think there's going to be a lot of valuable stories that come out of this, and I look forward to the comments from everybody around the world. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're the man, Dana. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Legend.
Appreciate it.
All right, brother.
Nice.